Hope you can all hear me okay. This is our webinar on how to get ranked and to apply for SRF, or State Revolving Loan Funding. We've got a lot to cover today, and we've got just an hour. So if you're new to the program and it feels like an awful lot of information, please know that we are available to answer your questions. There'll be some contact information at the end. Just in terms of just how we're going to run things today, as Amy noted, please do mute your mic when you're not speaking. We're going to do our best to save questions for the end. I think additionally, you can use the chat function, though I think with our time constraints, I don't know that we'll be able to get to all the questions in the chat or to respond real time, but feel free to put your comments in there. Again, I'm Padraic Monks. I'm the program manager for the Water Infrastructure Finance Program, and got a few teammates joining me today, including Meagan, Koss, Amy Galford, Tom Brown, and Lynnette, Claudon, and they'll be speaking to cover different portions of the presentation. So today we're going to cover instructions for getting on the project priority list for those of you who are seeking construction funding for both the drinking water State Revolving Loan Fund and the Clean Water Loan Fund. All right, we'll jump to the next slide. That's okay. We're going to cover the introduction to the funding cycle. Our funding cycle runs on a sort of annual but sort of continual basis in terms of getting projects onto the priority list and identifying the levels of funding and so forth. We'll be doing a bit of a deeper dive into our project priority lists, how those work, and then focusing specifically on the drinking water SRF.
No.
Is that on the right computer?
That one. Hi, folks out there, if you would please do your best to mute, that would. And then we're going to be covering specifically applying to be on the drinking water SRF project priority list application and clean water SRF priority list application. So Meagan, feel free to take it away to the next slide.
I would turn my camera on, but it's going to mess a lot of things up, I think. So my name is Meagan Koss. I am working with Amy Galford in the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program. Some of you might know me as the 3-acre stormwater ARPA funding coordinator. Still doing that a little bit. But today I'm here to talk a little bit about SRF steps and loan types. So when you apply for a clean water or drinking water loan with the SRF, your project and the resulting loan will initially fall into one of 3 categories. As your project progresses, the loan will be converted into the next loan, quote unquote step. Loans are referred to on kind of the inside by us staff as step 1 loans. So planning loans can include work related to developing an asset map, land for drinking water source protection, planning and completing a service line inventory, developing preliminary designs for a clean or drinking water project, and more. A step 2 loan refers to a design loan. So in the final design phase, the project is developed from the conceptual stages to a point where the project is permitted and ready to be put out to bid. And finally, construction loans are called step 3 loans. So to access funds for a construction loan, you must first apply to be on the Clean Water or Drinking Water Priority List, or PPL. This is different than a loan application. So Tom will explain the difference between these applications soon. And this is just kind of a brief introduction to our funding cycle. So every year we have a call for projects in December. The exact dates kind of vary year to year. Project priority list applications this year are due on March 1st. That's a couple of weeks from. So we get projects in the fundable range. I think Tom and Amy will be explaining that a little later. And for continuing projects, it's important to know that you need to apply on the priority list every year until construction is completed. On to Tom Brown. Tom, you're muted.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Brown. I'm the Clean Water State Revolving Fund project developer. I think that one of the very confusing parts or feedback that we get from a lot of people that are accessing our program is whether they're applying for funding or whether they're applying for being on the priority list. You would think it would be the same, but it isn't. You know, as Meagan was saying, we have our funding cycle, and every year you must submit priority list applications if you are looking for construction funding. You do not need to be on a priority list in order to access preliminary engineering or step 1 and step 2 funds, the preliminary engineering and final design funding. We like knowing when you're going to need those funds in the future because our priority lists do a forecast, and it helps us manage our fund. The funding that you request in your priority list application is it's not a loan, and it's not binding. These are best estimates that you would provide so that we can plan to use our fund. If you're, off by a lot, well, it could create some wrinkles for us. So we do want your best estimate. Also, the priority list is the application gets on and gets ranked, and then we use that to prioritize how we're going to fund things in a uniform manner. When it comes to the funding application, it's just a whole different thing. This is where you're actually asking for loan money. We have a smart form that we use that you can check the box at the top, and it will change the application to collect the information that we need in order to produce a loan. Although there is one type of funding that is not on that form yet, and that's the drinking water service line inventory. But all the other loans are on that, and you'll see at the top when you open it up that you have to choose what you're applying for, whether it's step 1, 2, or 3, and whether it's clean water or drinking water. And then also there are check boxes for pollution control grant. And if you are applying for that, you're probably going to be at construction by the time you ask for a pollution control grant. So we're not going to get into the priority or into the funding application in detail. This is really about getting through the priority list applications. Next slide, please. Okay. So what is a priority list? Well, there's 2 lists, one for each of the funding programs, the drinking water SRF and the clean water SRF. There's the reason that we do this is usually we have more projects than we do funding, and we need to prioritize who's going to get funded with the limited funds that we have. So there's a whole process. It's different on each side of the funding programs. The drinking water application is different than the clean water, I guess is what I'm getting at. The ranking process for the clean water is dictated by Chapter 2 of the Environmental Protection Rules. So it's a very intentional process. And so the clean water SRF application is actually, it's got nine ranking criteria, and we're going to get into that later. And the drinking water has its own process that we will review at the end of this. There'll be some demonstrations. So each project is going to be ranked, and there will be a numeric assigned to it, and that's how we do that. The criteria is different in each programs, but when we get into funding, we will run out of money before we can fund everyone. So that's why we will develop a funding line on each of the priority lists, and that's where we then notify people that they are available for funding. So we send out funds availability letters as part of the process. Once you're notified that you're able to be funded, you do have to keep on schedule with your project. If your project schedule isn't going to get you to construction during our fiscal year, then we're going to ask to bypass the project and provide money to somebody that's waiting further down the list. But that's another whole topic of discussion. One thing I did want to point out is that, you know, whatever you put on for costs, it's not a binding cost. You know, there will be opportunities to actually, when you apply for funding, you'll apply for what you need. But we really want to stay in the ballpark so that we're actually managing our fund well. As it was mentioned, the priority list applications are due by March 1st of this year. Every year we do this process. We open up, usually application period starts usually in December and ends at the end of February and March. And the funds available would be for July 1st of this year. Next slide, please. Right, so Amy, would you like to talk to the eligibility on the drinking water?
Yeah, so I'm Amy Galford, and I'm one of the drinking water SRF staff. So I'm going to talk about the eligibility criteria for drinking water. The thing to keep in mind is that our whole funding program is based on the Safe Drinking Water Act. So that's the federal regulation for public drinking water supplies. And then we have a state rule, the Vermont water supply rule, that states state water systems have to comply with. But our funding kind of goes in partnership with how water systems are regulated. So the drinking water SRF program has pretty specific definitions of who can be a borrower for our loans, and that's public water systems. That doesn't mean it's restricted to municipal water systems. It is restricted to community water systems, either public or private, and a few types of nonprofit, non-community systems. The main reason I wanted to bring this up is just before you start going too far down this process, make sure you understand whether or not you are an eligible borrower. I cannot get together with my neighbors on my city water system and apply for a loan. The borrower has to be the city water system that I'm on. And so that's just how it's structured. That doesn't mean they can't do a project in my neighborhood or I can't be involved in the process somehow, but the legal borrower needs to be related to a public water system. So it's often going to be a town, a city, a fire district on the municipal side. It may be a homeowners association. As a private side, it might be, we have a lot of schools that are nonprofit, non-community water systems, town offices, that sort of thing. So if you have questions about that, let me know. But that's one thing, is just to figure out, am I the borrower or am I on a bigger system that's actually the borrower? And even if you can't get funding through us, we can refer you to some other state programs in some cases. Then there's the question of, is the project that you're thinking of doing eligible? And again, tying back to the federal Safe Drinking Water Act and then our Vermont versions of that with some extra restrictions, we're looking for projects that are addressing public health concerns. And as Tom said, we don't have enough money to fund everything, even if it's a good idea. So what we do need to prioritize is things that address public health concerns. And then also projects that upgrade existing infrastructure. With some very few exceptions that are designed to deal with health concerns. We can't fund for the expansion of water systems into new areas or creating a water system where there isn't one already. Our main focus is making sure that existing public water systems that we already regulate as public water systems, that they're able to meet public health targets and that they're able to upgrade the infrastructure that they already have. If you have questions about the borrower or the project and what's eligible for that, there's two main guidance documents to look at for that. There's a federal one that the Environmental Protection Agency has, and then there's a state version. Those are linked from right inside the priority list application. So if you're opening up the priority list application for drinking water and looking at it, I linked those near the top of it. It's specifically guidance document number 8 for the state guidance document, but there's a federal handbook, and it's got tons of examples too, if you're looking for examples of projects. That's the drinking water side of things.
Great, thank you, Amy. On the clean water side, it's very similar, although we're not related to, a water system. We can lend to private or municipal borrowers. We can actually lend to smaller organizations, neighborhoods, and things like that as well, but they have to be organized. It couldn't be just a bunch of people signing up all at once. It does need to be a legal organization. The types of projects, there is so much that we can fund with the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund. I won't get into all of those, but there is a link down below there that will take you to a handbook that EPA has produced, and in that it lists all of the eligible projects. I would say the one thing that you need to know up front is there does need to be a clean water benefit. Originally, this funding program was only available to municipalities, and it was really for the purpose of treating wastewater, upgrading wastewater plants, refurbishing wastewater plants and collection systems, and things like that. It is expanded over time, and we're very much into stormwater now. We're also into developing new water systems or new wastewater systems for villages. If you have a question about whether your project is eligible, certainly pick up the phone or drop an email and get a preliminary determination. A lot of times we can tell right away if the project is eligible or not. Sometimes there are things that are kind of on the wire that need to be looked at a little bit deeper to determine the eligibility. One thing that I'm finding a lot of is I've had a lot of instances recently where people are looking for our program funding, but they haven't gone through our qualifications-based selection process for procuring an engineer. It's important that that is done because that opens the door for our funding. It's very common for somebody to get a feasibility study paid for with a grant from another program, and the QBS process is very particular to the Clean Water SRF program, and so there is a procedure for doing that. I'd be happy to help anybody get through that process. It is a little time consuming. So if you feel like you might want to use our funding, it's a good idea to start that conversation right away, so that you maintain eligibility for our funding going forward. Next slide, please. So we do, over time, we've had issues with our priority list where projects got on it and they really weren't ready to move forward, and it creates wrinkles for other people that are looking for funding. So what we've done is we've developed some minimum requirements for getting on our priority list for construction funding. First of all, you do need to apply, and then your project needs to be found eligible. And then the project does not need to be on there for your preliminary engineering and final design funding, just construction funding. And Amy kind of mentioned it, or actually I think Meagan mentioned it early on. Planning is a very wide range of different things that we can fund: asset management and feasibility and preliminary engineering, 20-year evaluations of wastewater plants, environmental review. A lot of times wastewater systems are looking for H&H and I&I studies to look at where water's getting into their system and how to optimize collection. In order to get on our priority list for construction funding, for either priority list, you do need to have a preliminary engineering report completed. That's the device where you would determine what your problem is and what your alternatives are for moving forward to correct the problem. We do have a template on our website that is used widely with other funders as well. But that would be your second step. First is get your qualifications-based selection process done. And it should be, I'm going to mention it, even though I think I may have already. The qualifications-based selection is only for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. It does not apply to the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So with preliminary engineering report, we're going to be able to determine whether or not your project is going to be able to meet the readiness to proceed criteria going forward. If we have concerns, we'll probably talk to you about it. But if you have a preliminary engineering report, or if you have something that's kind of equivalent to that, we might consider looking at that as well, to make a determination of whether or not it's practical for your project to be considered for construction funding for that year. If you don't have one, you might want to go ahead and start that process and get going. You can submit a priority list application, but it won't get ranked, and it will be used for forecasting. So we do want to see where you're going with your project so we can plan for next year and the final year thereafter. And we can also get an idea of what planning and design funding is going to be needed over the next year or two as well. The other advantage to getting on our priority list is your project is then visible. There's a lot of other funders that refer to our priority list for project development in their programs, where they can help out. It's very common that you would get approached from another funder if you're on our list, and they may have a very common USDA rural development is another funding partner that we have. So they may be looking at if it's practical for you to, if you would get a better deal with them, or if you would get a better deal with us as a project funding, that we would advise you on that as well. Next slide, please. I mentioned this is what the priority list looks like for each of the programs. The top one with the big red box, that is the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And just in a nutshell, this is how you would read it. If you look at the dark blue at the top, those are continuing projects. If you're already funded by our program and you're in construction, a lot of our projects are bigger and they take multiple years to get through construction. We will carry an existing project up in that area so that they're above all other projects, so that they can actually complete their project funding. The next is that light blue area. That is the fundable area. Those are all the projects that submitted priority list applications. And then we're ranked by point. And then you can see the bottom of that red box, there's a black line. That's the fundable line. So if you are in that light blue area and you're above the line, you're fundable. If not, you're not fundable at the moment. Usually we go through a process in November where we look at projects that are in the fundable area, and there inevitably is projects that are not ready to, their project schedule changed for some reason. There's no way they're going to get to construction. We will bypass them and we will go to the next person below the line and offer them funding. So they would get a funding availability letter from us. It's important to note that if you're in that fundable area and you get bypassed, it does not bypass your funding for any preliminary engineering or final design. It just means that you're going to have to apply next year and get back on the priority list for your construction funding. At the very bottom, you'll see there's some yellow down there. Those are the private borrowers. In the Clean Water SRF, we have some regulation about prioritizing municipal projects over private borrowing. So one of our rules of thumb is we have to bypass the municipal projects to get to the projects that are private borrowers. There is also a rule that we can't use 20%, more than 20% of our available funds for private borrowing. So we do have some limitations there, although they have not been an issue yet. And this year we were able to bypass and get all the way through all projects on our priority list with an offer for construction funding. Amy, would you like to talk about the drinking water priority list?
Sure. So I have a zoomed in graphic there. It's not as colorful, but I added some color to this version. I'll explain a little bit that the drinking water SRF right now has actually 3 priority lists. It used to all be 1 priority list for construction money because of the different chunks of money that we're getting from the federal government under the BIL infrastructure funding. It's coming in certain categories. And so we actually have 3 different priority lists, but the main one that most people apply to for most projects, and that is the most competitive in some ways, is this general priority list. So I literally have something called a funding line listed on those on the table, and I've zoomed in there on the right. There's two lines. One of them is in terms of loan money, being able to loan out money for the project, and that's with the purple line there. And that goes a little further here. I've also noted a date there. That was my estimate as of a certain date. And as we get caught up on processing some earlier loan applications, and as we find out which of these projects are ready to proceed, we may be able to fund projects further down the line. So as Tom was describing, there is a bypass process, and that funding line can move. It's not a fixed line for the entire year. The other line that I've got marked on there has to do with loan forgiveness. It's marked as subsidy in some places, but just think of it as loan forgiveness, money that doesn't have to be paid back. We also have a limited amount of that we can issue. And so there's also an initial estimate that we make at the time that we finalize our priority list and publish it. We designate where that is. And one thing to keep in mind is, this is a planning tool for us. It's also part of our loan application to EPA in order to get the federal funds. Part of what we're doing with collecting all the priority list applications from you and putting together this list is demonstrating to EPA that Vermont will actually make use of this money. So please, we do want this federal grant money that we can give out as loans. So we do the best we can to estimate that, but these numbers can change over time, just as your estimates. We're asking you to apply for the priority list right now, and your project may not go to construction for a long time. So it's a lot of moving numbers in terms of estimates. I think that's all I had about that. Yeah. So next slide. I'm just going to reiterate some of what we've talked about already in terms of the difference between a priority list application and a loan application, and I've tried to color code them a little bit here. So for the priority list application and loan application, as Tom described, they're different forms. And I do want to mention, you don't have to, we talk about them as the 3 steps. You're not out of luck if you didn't ask for funding from us for step 1 or 2. There are some cases where you may jump right into step 3. Maybe your water system took care of step 1 and 2 yourselves funding it, or you went to some other funding source. There are some cases where if you come to us for planning loan and go somewhere else for construction, we need to talk about paying off your planning loan. But in general, it's not that we require all 3 steps in order here. And there are some projects that may skip directly to step 3. In the case of drinking water, that's things like meter projects, standby power generators. Some of those don't require a construction permit from the drinking water division, and so they may jump right to step 3. That doesn't mean they don't need some engineering to them, but it's a little bit of a different process. For the priority list application, again, construction loans, that's what's due March 1st in a couple weeks. When those come in, we certainly look at what you fill out for what you think you deserve for points, but we verify those. I take a first cut at those, and then I work with Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division staff. The most points come for significant deficiencies, and I have that capitalized there because that's the kind of thing that's identified on a regulatory inspection. It's not just aging infrastructure. We know we have a lot of that in the state and all across the country. There are certainly good projects, but there are more points for things that are actually flagged as what's called a significant deficiency, or for things of having violations where you're actually in violation of the state water supply rule. The form also asks for financial information that goes towards preliminary loan terms, things about, are we able to offer you a 40-year loan term? What kind of interest, the interest rates are set, but what kind of administrative fees do we charge? Some other aspects of that, they vary a little bit depending on who the borrower is, and some aspects about the project, and also your local financial information. Again, this is preliminary. This is part of us putting together our planning picture for the year. And to give you a rough planning guide. The actual loan terms will be developed based on the actual loan application later. Another thing that we ask for there is things about how many users you have, because for drinking water, we're looking at a water system. You're going to be taking on a certain amount of debt, and how many users, how many connections is that going to be divided up by? So do your best to get the accurate information in there, and then also we will check it against records that are in the Drinking Water Division's regulatory database. Those come in as, for drinking water, as an email attachment. There's a specific email address on the form, so it's not just coming to my personal email address. It's a shared email inbox right now. I'm the main person working on it, but that way other people can access it, and that way they stay together in a separate place. And if we have time later, we'll open up the form and look at it. In terms of loan applications, so changing color there. So later on, or through a separate process, you may think about a loan application. So that's where you're actually borrowing the money, not this point scoring process for construction, but the actual loan application to get money. In the case of planning and design, so in our jargon, step 1 and step 2, or sometimes these get lumped together as planning loans. These can come in on kind of a rolling basis. They'll tend to get reviewed, as we have time, or in batches. Varies a little bit depending on the type of loan it is. Those are preliminary engineering, which would end up in a preliminary engineering report, an asset management plan, service line inventory, design loans. Those are not getting scored and ranked. In theory, they could be if we didn't have enough funding for these, but so far we've the last few years we've been setting aside enough money for these types of loans that they're not as competitive and not as deadline driven. They're more something we're trying to keep moving on a rolling basis. And some of them are money for the asset management plans. They're funded in a slightly different way. So that's all the planning and design cluster. Those can kind of come in when you're ready. For loan applications for a construction project, that comes after the priority list ranking. If you're not ranked in the initial fundable range, we're not going to process your loan application because we're assuming we're not going to get that far down on the point list, at least not at that point in time. So you need to get in the fundable range on the priority list, and then you come in for the loan application for construction. And those will be due by June of next year. It gets a little confusing about our cycle because it turns over in the middle of the calendar year from June to July. So if you're applying by March 1st right now, that's to get on our upcoming priority list that will start in July of this year, and it will run through June of 2024. Now, if you are not sure where you are in this process and how ready you are, there's no commitment, there's no application fee, there's no harm, there's no future penalty to applying to this priority list application. And if for some reason your project doesn't proceed, and there's a whole variety of reasons why it might not, you can get bypassed to the next cycle, or maybe something changes and you don't go forward with the project ever. That's okay. You do have to meet that March 1st deadline though, to get ranked. There's some rare cases of emergency projects that can get around that deadline, but for the most part, to be ranked on the next cycle, you need to get us an application by March 1st. It's not too daunting, so I would say when in doubt, apply for the priority list application. For the planning loans, you're not required to, but it does help us make sure that we're setting aside the right amount of money for those. And like Tom said, there's other reasons just to be aware of what's coming up. Okay, next slide. I'm going to lean on these screenshots in case we don't have time to go through the actual application. I haven't been getting a ton of questions about how to fill out the application. It's about 10 pages. It looks long, but it's pretty spaced out. And depending on the type of loan you're doing, there's usually parts of it that you can skip. I wanted to highlight a couple things for folks who have been familiar with it about things that changed for this year. This year I put in an explanation of all of the points that we calculate. Some of them were, it was a little unclear how we were doing that. There's some things that we calculate based on things that we already know about your water system, like how many users you have, and that sort of thing. So we do those point calculations on our end. You don't have to do them, but I provided an explanation on it so you can kind of understand what calculations we're doing. So it's just a little bit more in there where there's nothing for you to fill out, but it's explaining how we're doing the points. As I said before, we're getting different chunks of money from the federal government now. So we actually have 3 lists. And that first arrow I have pointing over to the right, and there's a bunch of little bubbles with text by it. And I realize those are too small to see, but there's a page there where you're going to describe your project and then try to tell me what category it belongs in. Most of them are just in the general category. If you're doing a project that's removing lead pipes or service lines, or doing an inventory of what service lines you have, that will belong on the lead priority list. And if you have emerging contaminants, which right now is focused on PFAS, that will belong on the emerging contaminants project. And there's a couple other types in there, and some of those point you in other directions. The source protection loans, those were added, described in last year's intended use plan, which is that annual document that includes the priority lists and other things about our program. Those have been available for a long time, but they weren't really in active use, and we're putting more money and loan forgiveness behind those. So I have a choice for that. Those have their own ranking system that is separate from most of the construction projects. They can come in on a rolling basis, but they do need to be scored. Couple little changes this year. We increased the number of points for having for your project being on an approved asset management plan. And again, that's capitalized. That's a document that has certain elements in it and that the drinking water division capacity staff have approved. And that's basically saying you've gone through some thinking about what assets your system has, which are the most critical to functioning, and which are the most likely to fail, and which are the worst consequence for failing. We've increased those points a little bit. We pulled out a new line item to deal with inadequate yield, and there's some really specific definitions in there about that. And then we broke up and clarified some of the points about installation of meters on that. That's all I wanted to say about that. Yeah, and we'll see if we have time to dive into that, but you can also ask me questions individually. Next slide. I think that's somebody else now.
Yeah, I'm Lynnette Claudon with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund on the engineering side. And the engineers in the Clean Water State Revolving Fund work on the ranking of the applications under the rule. We wanted to let you know that this year's Clean Water State Revolving Fund project priority list applications have some new features. So one of the biggest new features is we're going to ask you to show us if you have other committed funds. So those funds can include things where you've already got a signed agreement with another funding agency. And the purpose of this feature is so that we don't have to spend as much time bypassing towns if possible. So that funding line can initially be set lower. Next, we're trying to clarify when funds are needed. So we've added a drop-down menu instead of the date menu for so that it's really clear that you're asking by fiscal year and what the date ranges are in that fiscal year. So that fiscal year really sets what projects are ranked. So projects that will be ranked are village projects showing a cost and schedule for the village ARPA list in case there's any rescission money that will trickle down to other towns. A PER is not required to get on that village list. And then any project requesting funding for this coming fiscal year will be ranked. If you're requesting in a forecasted fiscal year, you will not be ranked. So projects that do not show a schedule will not be ranked. Projects that are clearly not asking for money will not be ranked. And projects that show a future fiscal year will not be ranked. We do, for planning purpose, ask that you report on 5 years of your construction funding needs for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. In terms of the amount of time you'll need to go into the applications, it's probably going to be more because when you answer yes to the questions, most of them require a reference to either the PER or another piece of documentation to justify the yes points. You cannot leave those answer boxes blank and submit the form. When you do submit the form, it submits automatically with the button and you won't necessarily see that it sent an email. So if you have to submit other documentation, please send an email in to the priority list application email and copy Hugo Martinez Casan for us so that we in the engineering group also have a copy. So I'm going to switch to a live presentation so we can look at what some of these things are like. So I've started filling out a application and I picked Burke. It's one of the villages I've been working with. Went just by selecting the town, this completes the affordability points for the project. So it's really important that you get that municipal information correct. And then in terms of the table with the funding needs, this is where you're making your actual funding reservation ask. And, you know, as Tom said, it's non-binding, but if for example, your planning project needs $10,000, maybe you got a $5,000 grant from somebody else, and you really only need $5,000, but we already paid for it. You know, then you would not be asking for the funding from us. If your design is $30,000 and you need that in this coming fiscal year, then that would show up there. And then if you need $1 million for construction and you have maybe an ARPA grant for 10,000 or 100,000, it would show up like this. In the event that you select your project for a different fiscal year, it will tell you that you don't need to keep going with the application. Unless your village project, if your village project, please continue the application. Also, please over here hit yes for the ARPA questions for village wastewater. So let's take a look at some of those yes questions and the boxes that pop up. When you hit yes, there'll be a box. It'll ask you to provide more information and it will give you some instructions on what additional information is to be provided. So that being said, I'm hoping that Meagan will overshare and put up the last slide. Now's the time for questions. I don't know if Meagan was going to moderate questions.
Yeah, I can. We have about 45 minutes, or it's 12:45, so that means we have only 15 minutes for questions. So I will go in order of raised hands for now because that is what I can see. So the first raised hand I saw was Hugo Martinez Cazon.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, before we go on to the actual real questions, just wanted to point out and reiterate what Lynnette said. All the questions, although she was highlighting what she wanted us to focus on, all the questions need an answer. One of the questions that was in the front page, for example, says, is your project an emergency? And of course, everybody wants points. So your temptation is to score everything. You're going to have to substantiate it. So when we review it, just bear that in mind, because that's, the little bubbles with the question marks will tell you the resources to be able to back up your claim. Thanks.
Thanks, Hugo.
Next we have Clark Guest.
Hey, folks. So I see that the form self-populates, Lynnette, as you indicated, and I'm looking at it now, just a blank one anyway. So last year we went through, if we did one last year, and provided documentation for like the public health scores and that sort of thing. So does that self-populate from last year, or do we go ahead and just answer those and provide the same documents that we provided, or not the same, but those and perhaps others if necessary?
Yeah, you're right on, Clark. So you can use your last year's application as a guide as you're filling out this year's application, and some of those backup documents will still be good.
Okay. Do you need them, or should we send them again?
You should send them again just in case.
Okay, great, thanks.
I don't see any other raised hands right now, so I'll just go through the questions that I see in the chat. I'll go ahead and just read them off. For private projects, is there any requirement that they notify or involve the municipality in which they are located to make sure that what they are applying for is consistent with our local requirements, etc.?
This is Tom. And I answered it farther down in the chat. I didn't see it early on. A municipal show of support letter is required when a private borrower is using our funds.
All right.
We have a template letter that we would provide. It's on our website as well.
Okay, it looks like Tom, you answered a QBS question after that. So the next question I see is regarding the criteria for showing other committed funds. For mobile home parks, housing funding agencies are requiring parks to apply to A&R first when they deem it's possible. So this may be a high bar for the parks to meet. Looks like it's more of a comment than a question. I don't know if anybody wants to address that at all. I see another raised hand. Clark, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't lower it.
Oh, that's okay. Legacy hand.
It's Lynnette. I don't mind answering Liz's question from the
Okay.
chat.
Sure.
So this is really only if there are other committed funds. So if you're applying and there aren't other committed funds, for sure, we would expect that to be zero if nobody else is committed funding. But we also work with a lot of communities that are funded with rural development, and they're often signing agreements before they're done final design. So in this case, we're really hoping that the project priority list won't be reserving money in quantities where it's not really expected by the community. So for example, if a community has a $16 million project and they have $12 million in funding from R&D, they only need to ask us for $4 million.
All right. Then Next question I see is, how long does the process generally take? Looks like some concerns about starting as early as possible.
The
In terms of
priority,
filling out the application?
The question isn't super specific. So I guess if somebody wants to cover priority list application, answer that, and then I guess loan. Oh, Joel says yes.
So in terms of the priority list application, if you're practiced and experienced with it, it can take, a half hour, especially if you're going off an old one. And Joel, I think in your case, you probably have an old one to go off of. But if you have a new project or if something's complicated, it can take a little bit longer. We also, on the clean water side, are hosting 3 different sets of open office hours that were advertised along with this event through the constant contacts list. So you have gotten a good start on your application and you have a quick question, or even when you hope is a quick question, you can join one of those open office hours. If you have a really complicated application, we can set up a meeting time to go through that. Joel, your hand's up. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. So from the time, once you're awarded the loan, you and fill out all the paperwork, how long does it take to get the money generally in the loan process?
I can answer that. So once the loan is issued and you've signed your loan agreement with the bond bank, you're going to be coming in for disbursement on a monthly basis. And my understanding is that those pay requests are turned around within a couple of days. It's all done electronically now. Now, as far as loan processing, it depends on the step of the loan and what's required for the documentation that's needed in order to complete the loan approval. If it's a step 1 loan, those go very quickly. As long as we have the engineering service agreement, and it's been approved, we can turn around a loan application very quickly. Within a month, you would probably see an authorized letter of funding, which means that the loan is approved and has been forwarded to the bond bank or to VITA for underwriting. Vermont Bond Bank and Vermont Economic Development Authority are the 2 mechanisms that we use. There are agents for our funds. Now, if you, sure, Joel, and if you apply for a step 2 loan, we won't be able to issue the step 2 loan until you've got the deliverable for step 1, which is a facility plan approval. It's much like construction funding, we wouldn't be able to fund unless you had a final design approved. So there are different requirements, but understanding that if you've given us everything that we need to do, we usually turn the loans around very quickly. We did have a backlog situation last year. Actually, I believe it's still going on, but we're almost at the end of it. And that was due to staff turnover and an influx.
Oh, and partly my fault as well. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
All right, Alice Peel has her hand up.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, okay, great. I just want to make sure I understand the scheduling and the process here. So we are in the middle of the PER right now. And my question becomes, depending on the funding we can get, we then would have to perhaps apply for a bond for the town to make up the rest of the gap in the cost of the project. Now, the thing is we would then have a municipal vote, a residents vote on that bond. And the discussions going back and forth on when to have it. So the question is, I just want to make sure I understand this, that we wouldn't be ranked if our project, we wouldn't be ranked this year in 2023 if our project was going to commence in, like, say, March 2024. Is that correct?
Alice?
Go ahead.
Okay. So Alice, that is correct for the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund money. So we're still going to rank the village ARPA projects on a separate list, and those don't need to have the completed PER.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now I get it.
Last question I see in the chat. Understanding the increased workload due to BIL, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, coupled with staffing issues, curious how the separate divisions of DEC are coordinating review of documents, and if there may be potential conflicts with some communities not meeting the required milestones or timelines due to delays beyond their control. Anyone wanted to comment on that?
I can just have a quick comment about that. I coordinate with the drinking water division all the time. That's maybe where the biggest concern is because I'm in one division and the drinking water staff are in the other division, but I actually work with them more than I do folks in my own division. So I'm in touch with them all the time, every day. Most of our deadlines are in terms of submission rather than approval. So that helps with it not being with items that have deadlines associated with them being kind of out of the water system's control, but we're tracking when you have submitted things to meet requirements. So I hope that helps. That's a much longer conversation though.
But just to add, certainly, the bipartisan infrastructure law and the increase in SRF funding certainly has increased workload. We have staffed up and so, we'll be adapting to that increased workload. I also just wanted to hit, looks like Joe Duncan had a comment, a question regarding BIL money. And again, BIL, bipartisan infrastructure law, amongst other things, increased the amount of, the annual federal grant that we get from EPA to help administer this program. And the question is, where's that money going to go relative to providing subsidy or loan forgiveness for construction projects? So I think the best indication of that would be to look at the current intended use plan. That's where we will be starting as we draft the coming year's intended use plan. And for everyone else, the intended use plan will spell out, how much money we have available and what the different categories of subsidy are. And again, subsidy being loan forgiveness. We offer different amounts for planning versus construction. There is, some of you may be aware of that. There's what's called CDS, or congressionally directed spending, also called earmarks, started up last year and is continuing. And so essentially the way that works is Congress is able to direct funding to specific projects in their states. And that's brought, a certain amount of funding into Vermont to help a broad range of clean water and drinking water projects. That money does come at the national level. All the money that's awarded is deducted from the money that's awarded to states under the SRF program. And so one way that affects us is that we have less what we call our base funding under both clean water and drinking water, which did last year and will again this year, reduce the amount of subsidy that we can offer, especially what we call additional subsidy anyone, meaning that it can go to any community rather than being restricted to go to disadvantaged communities. But all those details will be spelled out in the upcoming draft intended use plan, which we will, as we do, make available for public comment.
All right, it is 1 o'clock and I don't see any other questions. So good timing for everyone. Yeah, I guess once we get this wrapped up, I will make sure to put this webinar on our intended use plan page on our website. We also have a meetings page that I will also list this under. So, yeah, Padraic, Tom, Amy, Lynnette, anything else you want to add?
No, thank you. It's great to see the turnout. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Reach out with any questions. We're here to help.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Amy Galford, are you still there?
I am. You caught me just in time.
Can I ask a question about the asset management plan piece?
Sure.
I mean, obviously, that's how we functionally make our decisions about everything. I don't think that we have submitted an official plan to the state. And the primary project that we're planning on coming in for is our reservoir project, which, again, it's sort of like it's not like distribution where you're trying to pick between this pipe and this pipe based on risk and consequence of failure and likelihood of failure. Like, it is a fundamental piece of the system, which, you know, maybe will yield enough points on its own. Just trying to kind of react to the fact that we'll obviously out of the gate miss 75 points possibly, but it's like you don't really need an asset management plan to tell you that you got to take care of a reservoir which has a very high likelihood of failure and a very, very, very high consequence of failure. So
yeah, that would be pretty straightforward. I mean, I think, you know, there would be parts of that with a surface water treatment plant that would get more detailed, you know, much more into the specifics of how old were different pieces and processes. I mean, obviously that, you know, like you said, you don't have to go through a detailed mathematical exercise to figure out that that's a high priority resource. You know, I think very often the highest, the projects that are scoring the highest on the asset management plans are often scoring high for other reasons too.
Yeah.
Because if they're starting to fail, they're picking up points for multiple things. So we'll see whether that actually plays into a difference of which projects are high ranking. If you're having surface water treatment issues, that's the highest ranking thing for the deficiency and violations category too. But I
So,
realize we don't want to wait till it's the point of being deficient. And
Right,
so
it's
that's
not-
part of rewarding things for the asset management plan is doing that planning. You don't have to have gotten an asset management plan loan from us. I should have been clearer about that.
Yep, which
Um,
we actually did to
Okay.
install like a asset management software system. What I'm saying is that either I wasn't paying attention, I wasn't aware that these points were coming up, and I'm worried. We have this substantial project, which again, maybe we'll get points for other reasons, such as the fact that it's the source of water for the hospital. So there's some other points that I think we can get there. I don't know that we have any significant deficiencies. I think we have some minor deficiencies that were noted. And so I'm just concerned about not, because I didn't submit an asset management plan telling the state that in fact, this is our highest ranking project, that now we're going to be, you know, deducted sort of 75 points compared to somebody else who might have submitted that plan.
Yeah, and
So-
I should have, if we'd had more time to go into it, it was 50 last year, and I think it was 50 the year before. So it's gone from
Okay.
50 to 75. So it's
Okay.
not from 0 to 75. So you know, you don't have to go through our formal asset management plan loan. You can submit an asset management plan, I think, for review by the capacity staff, and they're the ones who review that. There's certain components that they look for in an asset management plan. And my guess is you probably have a lot of that already done.
Okay.
So I would check in with Meagan Young's group.
Mhm.
I would check in with her and see, you know, what you've got versus how much it would take you to have a formal asset management plan that they could approve. And
Okay.
see where things are on that. And
Okay.
the priority list doesn't get finalized until the spring, so there's still a little more time. So I can't
Are you
promise you
saying
that
that
an answer would change on that, but
I
you know,
see.
March
couldn't
1st is
get-
the deadline for submitting applications, and then the
Gotcha.
priority list comes after that.
But you're saying that if we potentially, I mean, because we have like a capital and, ever evolving capital planning list, which is based on risk. So we would have to clean that up and get it submitted. But you're saying if we got it, we wouldn't want to check the box yet, but if we got it submitted before the priority list is finalized, that maybe that could be given consideration.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I can't promise anything, but
Nope,
I would talk
totally
to Meagan Young
understand.
about it. And what I would also do on there is, I've got a few text fields in various places where you can explain what documents are backing up the points that you're claiming. So if you have and the difference between an asset management plan and a capital improvement plan, they're related and there's a lot of overlap and that sort of thing.
Yep.
So, the points that you put on there, we're not going to ding you if you check a box and then we say, we're not really giving you those points. Because
Yeah.
that happens. So the points are your best guess for what you're trying to claim. And then we will go through and verify those. And that takes a few conversations between me and the folks in drinking water. So I would follow up with Meagan Young. I don't want to give you a determination one way or
Nope.
the other, because that's their call on that. We have guidance document 26, which was updated earlier this year, and that has the components that are needed for an asset management plan in terms of like, what are I forget how many things, like there's like 15 items to check off that it needs to count as an asset management plan that they can approve.
Okay. No, I think you're picking up what I'm laying down, which is, without it even being on a plan, it's like the obvious large project. But
Right. It's not that you're at a point of zero planning, and a lot of what we're
Yeah.
trying to do is reward people for planning rather than rewarding people for getting into deficiencies.
Yep. No, and
So
yeah, that's great.
that's the goal for it.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, we had to make decisions about the points pretty quickly. If you have feedback about what we're doing for the points, you can submit those as intended use plan comments too.
No, and I mean, I'm a huge proponent of asset management planning. It's just doing it formally versus just it's part of our everyday life and how we make decisions. I think that's the main difference for me. So
yes, I think
I
it
will
would
talk
be
with Meagan.
less of a barrier for you to get there than
Yeah.
for a lot of folks, because you've already done a lot of that work. So
okay, sounds good. I really appreciate you staying on. Thank you.
Yep.